Chapter 4, Part 3. She didn't remain there long. The war and the siege were over, and the hateful peace terms agreed to, with France handing over Alsace, and Lorraine to Germany. Paris, on the other hand, was in a ferment of uprising, and soon the Commune erupted, that second terror of fire and bloodshed in which 20,000 men, women, and children lost their lives without knowing why. The government fled to Versailles, leaving the capital in the ruthless hands of the communards. For a time, Sarah stayed on in town, but her days were made miserable by petty persecutions and threats from the prefect of police. This was the communard Raoul Rigault, Rigault, who had been her vicious enemy ever since he sent her an atrociously bad play he'd written, which she returned with the none too diplomatic comment, "Monsieur, your play is unworthy to touch, let alone to read." Rigault's threats becoming seriously alarming, it is interesting to learn that the man was subsequently shot as a traitor. Sarah, with Maurice and her staff, also fled the city to Saint-Germain-en-Laye to sit out this latest national crisis. She didn't do much sitting, but vented her anxieties by writing them out. For among her varied interests and activities, she had an intermittent enthusiasm for riding. It was an excellent horsewoman. She went for daily canters along the surrounding bridle paths with her good friend, who knows, possibly a pro tem suitor, a Captain O'Connor, who later as general was to be the hero of the Tunisian campaign. One afternoon, as they were trotting through a glade in the Versailles forest, a communard who'd been lurking behind a tree sniped at them, but the bullet went wide off its mark. O'Connor whipped out his gun and shot the man squarely between the eyes. Sarah's odd reaction was to cry out at her escort, "Assassin!" Slide down from her saddle and hold the assailant's gory head in her lap until he expired. Then she returned to her horse, and she returned to her horse and O'Connor, and rode back to her house in stony silence, doubtless enjoying every moment of the melodrama. Next day, she generously forgave O'Connor for saving her life, and the two of them stood together on the terrace of the Saint-Germain chateau, watching the horrifying spectacle of the burning of Paris by the communards, with the Tuileries and countless other buildings going up in flames. By the end of May, MacMahon's loyal army had liberated Paris and the Commune was overthrown. The Republican government was back in power and Sarah reinstalled in the Rue de Rome. Her building had escaped the Holocaust, but her flat reeked of the smoke, which for days had hung like a pall over the city. It must have reeked even more interestingly after Sarah, in an effort to ameliorate the aroma, doused the rugs, velours hangings, and massive furniture with the heady perfume she habitually used. Her mood was one of black despair over everything: the defeat of her beloved country, the wreckage left by the communards, and the theaters still closed and no prospect for the future. To intensify the air of doom, she ordered all shutters closed and all curtains drawn, which must have made a curious atmosphere for little Maurice to play in, while she lay prone on one of her fur-strewn couches, feeling not long for this world about which she no longer cared. After a few days, this Werther-like self-indulgence was interrupted one afternoon when her butler announced that Monsieur Chili of the Odeon was calling. Sarah, still prone on her couch, wearily said to show him in. Chili groped his way through the encircling gloom to the chair she indicated with a wan hand-wave, cleared his throat, and informed her that he and Decanel were reopening the Odeon early in October with a double bill featuring André Furiet's one-act Jean Marie, in which they would like her for the feminine lead. Sarah, her face muffled in pillows, moaningly replied that she had no further interest in anything. The theater, her career, nothing. She was going to retire in Brittany and start a farm. What sort of farm she did not specify. Chili rose and said, very well, if that was her decision. He and Decanel would have to sign up another actress and, naming Jane Essler, a potential rival, quickly walked out of the room. Sarah, like a panther released from a trap, was after him in a bound. She grabbed him by the coat collar in a jerk which almost toppled the man over backward. Chili, she cried. When do we start rehearsing? Jean Marais was well received. The title role, that of a middle-aged Breton who was excellently played by the actor Porel. He had been one of Sarah's ambulance cases, was later to be director of the Odeon and to marry the delicious actress Regine. But it was Bernhardt's touching performance of his child wife which made the hit of the little play. In her memoirs, it is her modest assertion that the success of Jean Marie, due, of course, to her, carried its author straight into the Academy. It would be unkind to question this assertion in spite of the fact that André Thuret did not gain his entree into the Académie Française until some 20 years later. Thuret, T-H-E-U-R-I-E-T, Thuret, not everything is an A. After the strain and horrors of the past year, Bernhardt was happy again. She was not yet a star, but was once more the pampered leading lady, the goddess of the left bank. Best of all, she was back in the theater she adored. The dear old Odeon with its Doric temple columns, sheltering friendly arcades with little book stalls and cheap flower stands where her Latin Quarter adorers bought her small string-tied bouquets to toss in her carriage. She was back at the milieu she delighted in, the hard-working, zestful repertory company. All good companions. Her time spent there, she recalled, was like existing in a happy provincial village. During the early 70s, the grand old man of Paris, in fact, of France, was Victor Hugo, who had returned from exile shortly after the overthrow of the empire. He was welcomed home like a conquering hero, a long-lost messiah. Such national adulation could not have been motivated solely by the fact that he was one of the greatest poets of the 19th century France, or that his plays and novels, ponderous as they may seem to modern readers, in their day threw over stultifying convention and spearheaded the way for liberating romanticism. Many of his worshippers had never read a word Hugo had written. It was because in France there had grown up a Hugo legend with the public. He symbolized all that was implied in their burning words of liberté, égalité, fraternité. For some curious reason, he was welcomed as a sort of savior in his country, although other patriots had worked more actively to save it. There was a nationwide apotheosis of Victor Hugo. Poets sang his praises. Eminent lecturers made him the subject of their discourse, and when he gave audience to friends and admirers in his house at the Place des Vosges, it was said that one couldn't see the master for the incense. The master was also known by his few detractors as the monster, and the morally prudish were shocked by stories which periodically cropped up concerning his private behavior. Although well in his 60s, the grand old man was known still to have much of the grand old satyr in him. Satyr, S-A-T-Y-R, satyr. Late in 1871, the Odeon management felt it was time to produce one of Hugo's plays. They decided upon Ruy Blas, R-U-Y-B-L-A-S, the verse drama based on the story of Don Cesar de Bazan, who, in vengeance on the Queen of Spain, who has spurned his advances, sends Ruy Blas, his valet, in the disguise of the absent Don Salluste, to make love to her, a ruse which proves all too amorously successful for both of them and ends in utter despair, utter disaster. Bernhardt did some deciding on her own, and that was that she was going to play the queen. Her decision was not completely shared by the management. Her friend Decournau was all in favor of Sarah, but Chili had set his mind on engaging the popular actress Jane E. Esler. While the matter was under discussion, Sarah wasted no time but went about pulling wires, and when Sarah Bernhardt pulled a wire, it was a live one. She turned her persuasive charm on Paul Meurice, Hugo's manager. Auguste Vacquerie, a relative, and his close friend, the actor Geoffrey, who was to play Don Salluste. The three managed to maneuver the maitre, M-A-I-T-R-E, maitre, himself into requesting her for the part. Mm. He had seen her performance in Jean Marie and had thought her good, though not great, but adequate to interpret his queen. Sarah herself almost ruined her chances through an idiotic gesture of petty egotism. The great author asked that the first reading of his play take place not on the stage or in the green room of the theater, as is customary, but at his house in the Place de Vosges, Vosges. No, time to Google. A demand which Sarah chose to consider an outrage to professional tradition. Back in her salon at the daily 5 o'clock gathering, she discussed the proposition with her faithful and all too doting court. Most of them agreed with her, and she was about to dash off an indignant note to the management, flatly refusing to attend a first audition of any play, no matter how famous the author, anywhere but in the theater, when Marshal Conrobert, who was not only a brilliant general but a tactful diplomat, arrived in time to advise her to plead indisposition as the excuse for not going to Hugo's house. Her note, one of her few legible ones, read, "The Queen has taken a chill, and her camera mayor forbids her go out. You know better than anyone else the etiquette of the Spanish court. Pity your Queen." Hugo's terse reply was, "I'm your valet." The first reading of Ruy Blas was held at the Odeon. The author himself attended every rehearsal, sometimes sitting on a chair in the wings, sometimes standing at the back of the house. Sarah's first attitude toward the maitre, I gotta look that up, of which she was later ashamed, was one of elaborate indifference, a sort of "who does he think he is" bravura. Hugo took her childish behavior with a friendly irony. He quite disarmed her one day when, during a scene in which she did not appear, she chose, during the wait, to perch on a table, swinging her feet with gamin nonchalance. Hugo scribbled something on a bit of paper and solemnly handed it to her. He had written, "Un reine d'Espagne, de honnête et respectable ne devrait pas ainsi s'asseoir sur une table." And it says, "A queen of Spain, honest and respectable, should not sit in that fashion on a table." Sarah, upon reading it, burst into peals of laughter, jumped from her unqueenly perch, and all but flung her arms around the neck of the illustrious master. From that moment on, she joined the ranks of the worshipful Hugolatres. Suddenly, she was aware not only of the greatness of this man, but of his essential goodness. When he arrived for rehearsal, she wrote, the place took on a new light. On the night of January 16th, 1872, Sarah Bernhardt became a star. Her performance of the love-stricken queen was a thing of lyricism and beauty. She wore a tiny coronet of silver lace and pearls, and it seemed to symbolize her regal youth and fragile grace. The public, her beloved monster, fell completely under her spell. It was as if every man, every woman in the audience were breathlessly in love with her. And at the finish, the house went wild. In addition to her left bank following, the fashionable of Tau Paris were attending this opening. After the last curtain call, friends, admirers, and any number of celebrities came crowding into her dressing room. Among them was the genial royal French Francophile, the Prince of Wales. He too had fallen under the Bernhardt spell, a happy condition of emotion which he was from time to time to re-experience in the future. Suddenly a hush came over the hubbub of visitors as a white-haired, short-bearded man appeared in the doorway, and the heir to the British throne stepped aside to make way for Victor Hugo. For once the master of words was at a loss for them. He dropped on one knee, kissed his queen's delicate hand, able only to murmur, "Merci, merci." She could hardly make her way past the stage door and out through the cheering crowd, jamming the Rue Vaugirard clear across to the palings of the Luxembourg Gardens. Once safely in her carriage, she received a further gratifying, if hair-raising tribute from the delirious students, who unharnessed her horses and, taking the shafts themselves, ran her all the way to the Rue de Rome at breakneck speed, shouting, "Make way for our Sarah!" It was a question of whether she or the students would have had the first heart attack. Once back in her flat, she stayed up for what remained of the night, talking with her dear Gerard. Due to Bernhardt's performance of the Queen, Ruy Blas was the hit of the season. It had been running for some months when she received one morning a hand-delivered envelope bearing a single engraved circle enclosing the words Comédie Française, 1680. Her heart leapt, but she was afraid to open it. She knew it would contain an offer, and she knew she would have to accept it. Yet she knew it represented the end of the happy freedom and security she enjoyed at the Odeon, and could continue to enjoy for years to come if she chose to ignore the road ahead. But the road was opening up, and she had a clear intuition that it could lead her in triumph around the globe. She had told George Sand that she would die if she could not be the greatest actress in the world. Should she die comfortably here in the Odeon, or use the first theater of France as a stepping stone to that greatness and the rest of the world? She opened the envelope.